Philippine Council for Evangelical Churches declared 2020 through 2030 as the decade of discipleship. And they asked, because victory is known throughout not just this nation, but throughout the world for discipleship, they asked me to put an article in here about discipleship in the context of healthy church and sort of healthy discipleship. And so it's in there. They also asked if I would speak at the 34th annual conference. Again, they wanted me not to preach a sermon, but to do a Zoom with pastors all over the Philippines and talk about victory and discipleship and what God has done here through our relational discipleship over decades. You'll see a picture on the screen that Pastor Rico sent me 2 days ago. And if you look at the picture, you see this was taken many, many years ago. Look hard and you'll recognize the people. And Bernie was leading a discipleship group before he was the running bishop. And Rico looks like a teenager in this picture. And as you look across, there's L.A. Mumar, who has preached all over the country. He's a basketball coach now, but continues to preach the gospel. And then there's his brother Vico, who is currently the mayor. When you do your victory groups, when you meet with people and build in a relational discipleship context, you never know what God might do in and through those people when you push that forward a few decades. I was with Pastor Rico and Kitty a few weeks ago in Panama. And most of you know Pastor Rico and his family moved there with a fantastic team from victory congregations all over Metro Manila, even the provinces. And what an honor to be there with them. They're working on their Spanish. Actually, every one of them are conversational. Some are fluent. Rico's working hard on it. But what I was really impressed with was how that team was reaching out to the students, even though they weren't able to physically meet. We walked the other UP, University of Panama, the UP branch over there. We met with professors, we met with department heads, and they were so excited to have Every Nation campus on their campus. We met with some Christian professors who said that we were the answer to their prayers. All those who are supporting our missionaries and those who are praying for our missionaries, make sure you put Panama at the top of that list. I'm really, really excited about what Rico and the team and what they're going to accomplish. And those of you who have close friends and maybe even family members there, I just want to tell you they're all doing great, really, really doing a great job. When we think about this idea of greater works in the soil, in the context of relational discipleship, I thought about when I landed Saturday night. Again, we haven't been able to travel here for a couple of years. I've been to other places. Like I said, Panama. I was just in Berlin a few weeks ago. And, of course, there were victory missionaries there in Europe that I had got to connect with. But coming here, when we landed and we went through all of the immigration process, that's multiplied how long that takes because of all of the COVID papers and all the tests and all the things they have to check. So we're pulling into Global City around midnight, and as soon as our apartment building came into view, Tang, our office driver who was driving Deborah and I, turned around. We're at a stoplight. You could see our building in front. He turned around and smiled and he said, "Welcome home. Welcome home." He didn't say, "Welcome to your house." He said, "Welcome home." You know, house and home in English are words that are similar. They're almost synonyms, but not quite. You don't ever tell someone, "Welcome to your house." You say, "Welcome home." And there are reasons why pulling up to our apartment building, which is our home, felt like home instead of just a house or an apartment. When you think about a house, it's a physical facility, whereas home is relational. A house is a building, but a home connotates a family. A house is a place. A home is all about memories. When I was 10 years old, 1969, I remember maybe the worst family vacation ever as a child. Our family would regularly go to the beaches of Florida. But this year, for some reason, my dad decided we were going to get in the car, my mom, my dad, and all 5 kids, and drive what seemed like an eternity across Mississippi into Louisiana into Texas, and then Texas is a huge state, across the desert, way into West Texas to see my dad's hometown. We had never been there. He was so excited. And he showed us the house where he grew up. Now, look, I was 10 years old. I was so bored. What to me was just a building, to him, they were memories. To me, it was just another house. To him, it was home. I get it now because I had done the same thing to my kids. When they grew up here, and I would drag them back to the States to show them my childhood home. Home is about relationship. And so what I want to talk about today is the idea that relational discipleship is more like a home than a house. You can have a house that's not a home, but you can't have a home that's not a house. All right? Home takes the idea of house and makes it's filled with emotional connections and memories that are rooted in relationship and family. Because of that emotional attachment, there's something that goes much deeper than just a place or an address or furniture. I want to look at 3 texts today. 3, right? One right at the beginning of Matthew's Gospel, one right in the middle, and one at the end. And I want to look at this, and when we think about greater works, I'm here to remind you that they're all connected relationally. We don't do discipleship, and we certainly don't do greater works in a vacuum that doesn't have a relationship with Jesus or with the people that we're walking with and ministering the gospel to. So let's start in Matthew chapter 4. And we all know this scripture, but I want to see if we can see it in a new light in the context of relational discipleship. Verse 18. While walking by the Sea of Galilee, he saw 2 brothers, Simon, who is called Peter, and Andrew, his brother, casting a net into the sea, for they were fishermen. And he said to them, "Follow me, and I will make you fishers of men." Immediately they left their nets and followed him. And going on from there, he saw 2 other brothers, James the son of Zebedee, and John his brother, in the boat with Zebedee their father, mending their nets. And he called them, and immediately they left the boat and their father and followed him. There are several words that are repeated here for emphasis. Net, boat, and immediately. We see these words show up in this narrative over and over and over. And when we think about these fishermen, several thousand years ago, if you were a fisherman in those days, the 2 most valuable assets you have for your business, for your livelihood, for your family, are boats and nets. And so here are the boats and nets, and those words pop up over and over almost every sentence. And what this means when he speaks about, Jesus says, "Come and follow me." And it says, in one story it says they left their nets. The other one with Peter and John, it says they left their boat. So they walked away. To follow Jesus is not just about the future, but it's also walking away from some of the past. Jesus asked them, and he called them to leave the most valuable possessions they had and follow him somewhat into an unknown future. Following Jesus in relational discipleship has to do with our past, our present, and our future. It's a walk of faith. It's a walk of sacrifice. There's a cost involved. And I think as we talk about making disciples and doing greater work, and we talk about this Discipleship 2022, we've been doing this year after year, decade after decade, and the message is still the same. And I think if we really want to share the gospel with people, we're not sharing the whole gospel if our gospel is not calling people away from stuff and to Jesus. When we walk away from something, we have to turn our backs in order to turn to Jesus. And so he called them to follow. Relational discipleship is following Jesus, but it's not a solo thing. They were following Jesus with the others who were following Jesus. So right at the start, right here in the beginning, Matthew 4:18 through 22, it says, follow Jesus. Now, when we get to the middle of the gospel, we get to the middle in chapter 11, verse 28 through 30. Another familiar passage to many of you. And here's what happens. When we follow Jesus, we fish for men, we follow along with others. We find as you read the journey, there are these ups and downs in the narrative. There are times when Jesus is preaching, times when he's feeding the hungry. There are times when he's praying for the sick and casting out demons. And there are times when it's just this amazing adventure they're on. But there are also down times. And this is what we see in chapter 11. We see that Jesus comes and the disciples are following him and they're fishing for men. And they're doing this all together in this small community of 12. But they hit these cities that are described as unrepentant. And it's a tough time. This is not a good moment here. It's not filled with miracles and it's not filled with adoring crowds. It's really kind of a tough moment. In verse 25 it says, at that time, at this time when things were difficult, time when things weren't going as they had hoped, time when things weren't as easy as maybe at the beginning when it seemed like there were miracles all the time. They hit this rough spot. They're following Jesus. They're fishing for man. They're doing this in community. They've left their boats and their nets and they're walking in faith and they hit this rough road. It says at that time, verse 25, Jesus starts talking. And then we get to verse 28 of chapter 11. And that season when it got tough for him, he said, come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy, my burden is light. Again, we often like to individualize the follow Jesus, but it wasn't an individual thing. It was Peter and John, Peter and Andrew, James and John. It was pairs, and there were other people following Jesus. So to follow Jesus is not a solo trip. It's done in community. And then right here, when he talks about that, come to me, all who labor. All means not just you. There's a group that this is being said to. And then it says, you'll find rest not for your soul, not an individual, but you'll find rest for your souls. This is a message to a group of people. Come to me. Again, following Jesus is done in community. And then once we're weary in this task of following him and making disciples, this relational discipleship journey, and this fishing for men journey, and this doing that in fellowship together journey, there comes difficult times. Seasons when it's not going as we had hoped. Maybe not going as well as it was last week or last year or last decade. And in those seasons, the message is, come to me, together, in community. Come to me, take my yoke, and you've heard teaching and preaching, and you've studied about the yoke. And when we yoke with Jesus, there's a burden that's light now. I was thinking about this idea of coming to Jesus. And it's spoken at a time, as I said, when things aren't just wonderful. There's some difficulties. My daughter-in-law sent this on my family thread. She sent this picture. And that's part of my daughter-in-law you can see, and my grandson George, who's 3. And here's what the caption said. The kids watched the Bible story episode of Samuel this morning. George was deeply disturbed by Hannah leaving Samuel at the temple, so he came to find me for some snuggle time. And then she sent another one. Later that night, he did it again, and then the next morning. And later talked to him. He was so troubled. And I just never thought of that story from a 3-year-old mind. And I think he was worried that his parents were going to take him to church and leave him there and never pick him up. Kind of like Samuel. So it was kind of a freak zone for George. And so he was clinging to his mother until she could convince him that, no, we're not going to dump you off at kids' church and leave you there and see you when you're 20. It's not going to happen. But I think there are times when come to Jesus is that kind of message. When whether it's fear or whether it's the anxiety of what might happen, and oftentimes those things aren't real, just like with George. It wasn't even a real threat. Sometimes they are real, sometimes they're not. But nevertheless, there's always an invitation to come to Jesus. It's what He's calling us. And so this discipleship journey starts with follow me along with others and we'll fish for men. In that journey of following and fishing, there come times when we need rest for our souls, and we need to get to Jesus again together. Don't individualize it. And then what happens? We re-yoke with Him. But as you read the next few pages, when He says, come to me and I'll give you rest, come to me and you'll find rest for your souls, you'll find the next few pages are about the Sabbath. And what you find is Jesus is healing the sick on the Sabbath. Jesus is ministering on the Sabbath. So it's not always a physical rest or a checking out of life, but it's a rest for the soul. And a rest for the soul, again, I keep emphasizing this. We're talking about relational discipleship, and all of this is done in community. It's done in relationship with other people. It's one reason the pandemic and the lockdowns have been so difficult. I appreciate Zoom. Life the last few years has been better with Zoom than it would have been without. But it is not like embodied presence. It's not like really being face-to-face together. When I gathered in Berlin about 3 weeks ago with our European leaders who are having a war, and our pastors in Ukraine were unable to be a part of that gathering. We had different pastors closer to the war zones on Zoom. But one by one, those pastors were so happy to be together face to face. And as much as we tried to have life-giving relationships in distance, and we did the best we could all over the world, but there was something different about actually being there. I feel that being here. It is really it's refreshing to my soul to be here and reconnect face-to-face and physically. So, what are we saying? Relational discipleship. How do we do greater works? We do it together in community. Relational discipleship starts with a call to follow Jesus together. And as we're following Him, sometimes we get so into the fishing for men that we now are carrying heavy burdens and heavy yokes. And then the message of discipleship is come to Jesus together and re-yoke with Him, and He carries the greater weight and the greater burden when we do that. And then now we get from the front to the middle to the end of the book of Matthew, and we come to that passage in Matthew 28 verse 19. Go therefore and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all that I have commanded you, and behold, I am with you always to the end of the age. Follow Jesus. Come to Jesus. But look at the last one. Go to them. There's always this rhythm in the Christian life of following Jesus, coming to Jesus with our burdens, and going to them. Right at the beginning of the discipleship journey, that call to Jesus, remember, it was also a call to sacrifice. Right in the middle of the discipleship journey, it was that come to Jesus if you're exhausted and if you're heavy laden and burdened and feel like you're carrying the weight of the world. It's time. Come to Jesus. And then at the end of it, there's this, now go and take this message. And there's an adventure that He calls us to. It's not pick one of the three that you're more comfortable with. It's all three, but at different seasons, at different times of life. One is emphasized more than the other. And we live this rhythm of following Jesus together, fishing for men, of coming to Jesus and unloading our burdens together before Him, and going out together, back on mission, re-following Jesus, coming to Jesus and unloading our burdens, getting back on mission, and taking this message of the gospel to people who are far from Him. It's like my lifelong friend, Pastor Joey Bonifacio, says, discipleship is relationship. It really is. And the way we're going to not only have an impact in our own lives, but do greater works, is going to come out of a relationship together with Jesus, a relationship with one another, and how we build a relationship bringing the love of Christ, the gospel of Jesus, to people who are far from Him. So let me encourage you, follow Jesus, come to Jesus, go to them, and do it together.
Thank you, Pastor Steve. Tayo po tayo lahat as we pray.